Okay, so I have a question for you. So if someone is in an accident and they don't have pain, let's say they don't have pain right away, and then they try to let the pain go away on its own and it doesn't, and then at that point they start treatment, does that make it more difficult from an insurance perspective?
Oh, sure. That's always more difficult, right? And so if you're in an auto accident, the first thing that we encourage everybody to do, and you would say the same thing, I think, is get evaluated by a medical professional, right? You don't always have to go to an emergency room. You could go to an urgent care. You could make an appointment with your primary care doctor within a couple of days, but you should get checked out by somebody. Even if you're having just a little bit of pain, and just to make sure that it doesn't become something big. So that's the first thing I would say to everybody is just get checked out and make sure that a medical professional has cleared you. And if you're fine, then you're fine. Okay. But what we see a lot is people who put it off. And I'm somebody that would do exactly this, right? Wait 2 weeks before I go, this isn't going away, and I need to go see a doctor about this. And an insurance company absolutely is going to look at that and say, if he were really hurt, he wouldn't have waited 14, 15 days to get in and see a doctor. And so what I end up telling people like that is there's one of two things that I can explain away. I can explain away you waiting a long time to going to see a doctor, and I can explain away a crash where there's not a lot of damage. But I have a really hard time explaining away both, especially to a jury, because all of these cases, if I can't settle them with the insurance adjuster, are going to be heard by a judge or a jury somewhere in Virginia. And jurors and judges are skeptical of people who are in small crashes who wait a long time to get treatment. And so I can make one of those problems go away, but I have a really hard time making them both go away.
That's interesting. Let's say you have a client who has done some treatment and let's say they've recovered, or so they thought, and they're feeling better, so they're released from care, and then later on they start to have more pain and discomfort as a result of their accident injuries. Can you talk about that a little bit, about how that affects things?
Yeah, so that's it makes my job difficult, right? Because I've got to explain to an insurance adjuster or ultimately to a judge or a jury why it was that you had 8 weeks of care and you either discharged yourself or the doctor discharged you, and then you waited 3 weeks and then you went back to see a doctor, right? That's hard to say, because a lot of times, and you know this, you'll keep the pain scale in your office. Every time somebody comes to see you, you say, how you doing, 1 out of 10? And in the beginning they say, it's a 7, it's a 6. And towards the end, they're usually feeling better, and it's down to a 2, 3, 4. And so what we'll see in those cases is somebody's got a 2, 3, 4, and then they are out of care, and then life kind of catches back up with them, right? And so by the time they come back in 3 weeks, 4 weeks later, pain's back up to a 6 maybe. And an insurance company is going to look at that file and say, well, what happened between here and here increases pain from a 3 to a 6? And usually it's precipitated by something like, I mowed my lawn, I picked up my kid, I tried to go back to the gym, and that's what's going to go in the doctor's note, right? He went back to the gym and now he's got more pain. And so an insurance adjuster is going to look at that and say, well, this is the cutoff point. I'm not paying for any medical costs after this.
Right.
And so whether we're able to get that medical cost compensated for honestly depends a lot on the client, because a lot of times at the negotiation level, when I'm just talking to an insurance adjuster, that person is going to say, I'm not paying for anything afterwards. And so I have to evaluate it now from, is this a client that a judge or a jury is going to like and believe, or is it not? And those are hard conversations to have with clients. And if you're somebody who maybe has a number of claims in your history, it can be really hard to convince a judge or a jury that those 3 weeks where you didn't have care and then the care that you got after that is related to this auto accident and not to your degenerative disc disease, right? Your age-related changes in your spine,
right,
or any of the other auto accidents that you had.
Makes sense. Can you talk a little bit about if someone is in an accident and they're injured from that accident, but let's say before the accident they also had a maybe pre-existing injury like a disc problem and maybe their neck and their back, and then they have the accident and then they have a new it's worsened the existing condition. So is that something that there's going to be a problem from an insurance perspective?
Those are hard cases. And those are cases where if you have that problem, you need a lawyer. Not every auto accident case requires a lawyer to get it settled, but that's one of them. Especially if you're somebody who was seeing a chiropractor for maintenance visits, right? So if you've got a 2-year history where you're going to a chiropractor once a month, twice a month for maintenance to get realigned, then you start going 3 times a week after your auto accident, you're going to need a lawyer to explain why your back pain before the crash is different than your back pain after the crash, because insurance companies just don't treat those people fairly. And so the law in Virginia compensates you for the aggravation of that injury, okay? You don't get compensation for your underlying injury. And so really, when you look at a case like that, if you have somebody who's going once a month and then they're going all of a sudden 3 times a week, if you're doing this right and you're evaluating the case correctly, then the compensation for the medical costs should really only be those 11 additional visits a month, right? Because you don't get compensated for the underlying injury. You get compensated for the extent to which somebody made it worse or made it harder or more expensive to treat. So again, those are difficult cases. Those are cases where if somebody were to call me and say, here's the problem that I have, the insurance company says I have a pre-existing condition, I say, you need a lawyer, and you also need to probably have some reasonable expectations about what I can do for you.
Right.
Because in Northern Virginia, juries are skeptical of people like that. It's just the honest truth, right? Somebody who's been going to a chiropractor for a significant period of time and then goes more because they're in an auto accident, jurors are just skeptical of that. So, but let me ask you, because I think it's a similar kind of question, somebody who's seeing you on a regular basis, are they more susceptible to an injury from an otherwise minor crash than somebody with a healthy neck and back?
Yeah, I would say not in every case, but in a lot of cases, yes. So like if you have, let's say you have a bone-on-bone disc herniation in your neck, and
that's a bad thing to have.
That is a bad thing to have. Yeah, I know that's basically in your neck. You've got bones that stack on top of one another, and then the discs keep them separated. So over time, that disc can compress, and that can irritate the nerves and cause a whole bunch of different problems. But let's say you had that outside of an auto accident, and we did some treatment on it and got you back to normal, full function, which happens all the time. Now you're feeling really good, but your neck is still in a fragile state because that disc compression has not gone away. We've improved it, and we've gotten maybe those disc fragments away from the nerve roots, but we haven't, once the disc compresses, it's going to be compressed. So because of that, if you then apply some sort of trauma, like an auto accident, to a person with that type of issue, that can have a lot worse effect than someone with just a normal neck.
And of course, somebody who's already sitting there with a disc protrusion is more likely to get a herniation as a result of an auto accident than somebody with an 18-year-old spine, right?
No doubt. Yep. So he's talking about like a disc protrusion or a disc bulge. So the disc is like a jelly donut, and when it's just bulging, that means the donut just kind of pushed out of position. But a herniation would be a more serious problem where the jelly is actually squeezed out.
You have some of the liquid from inside your disc actually squeezing out of the disc space.
You got it.
That's another bad problem to have, isn't it?
Yep, no doubt. And one thing I'll mention too is it's not unusual in these auto accidents to have people that have had prior injuries because let's face it, a lot of people have.
Especially in Northern Virginia.
No doubt, yep. So what we always try to do is, document their pain level immediately prior to the accident, and then right after, and then return them to that we're trying to return people to the pre-accident status. So as you know, that's important to document and do. One question that I always get with these, when people come in with an auto accident and they have concerns about dealing with the insurance company or whether they need to talk to an attorney, is, there's a lot of sort of murkiness in their mind as far as what's going to happen if they talk to an attorney. Yeah. Is this going to be a settlement process or is it going to be a trial process? Can you talk a little about what to expect?
Right. So I think some people are afraid to talk to a lawyer because they think that automatically means you're going to file a lawsuit.
Right.
If I have a lawyer, am I going to trial? And the reality is that the vast majority of auto accident cases don't go to trial.
Okay.
What I tell people is, and we haven't done the numbers on this in a long time, but probably 75% of cases settle before you ever have to file a lawsuit. And of those cases where you file a lawsuit, probably another 75% of them settle before you go to trial. So there's a couple of things that make your case more likely to go to trial. If you don't have a lot of property damage to your car, that makes you more likely to go to trial. If you have a lot of medical care. The big one is if there's a liability dispute, you are almost certain to go to trial, right? If there's...
and what does that mean?
Right, sorry. So if you're at a stoplight and you're going through a green light and you get hit by somebody that goes through a red light, but the police didn't see it and there's no witnesses, and he says, no, I had the green light, right? Now we have a dispute over who caused the crash.
Gotcha.
So those kinds of cases are likely to go to trial. And in Virginia, we have a rule called contributory negligence, which means that if you're 1% at fault for the happening of your crash, you can't recover anything. And so in that situation, you would have a driver who admits that he ran a red light, but you were also speeding. You were doing 50 and a 35. And had you not been doing 15 miles over the speed limit, you would have seen him coming and you wouldn't have gone into the intersection.
Okay.
Right? So if you contribute even 1% to the happening of your crash, you don't get to recover anything from that guy.
Wow.
So liability disputes, small property damage, people with prior similar medical conditions are more likely to go to trial because it's sometimes difficult to explain the difference in your problem from before the crash and after the crash. And then people who sometimes treat for a long period of time without much explanation for why they're treating. And so I'm sure you've seen this, right? The back injury that just never seems to improve.
Yep.
Even though you've done an MRI and there's nothing showing up on the MRI and there's nothing on the x-rays or the CT scans, it just doesn't go away.
Right.
And so insurance companies have a hard time of accepting that that is from the crash and that somebody isn't either making it up or has a longstanding history of that problem that they just never told somebody about.
That makes sense.